Okay, Masechet Yoma, Daf 50. All right, we're getting through the Masechet. We're in the middle of talking about an interesting case of a kohen gadol who brings the pod as part of the hatat that is atones for his sins and that of all the other kohanim. He does shechita, and then the other kohen is mixing it, and that kohen gadol dies, right, all of a sudden. And now the next new kohen gadol B, comes, and the question is, can he use that same blood, even though he didn't do vidui on it, he didn't do shechita? Can he just continue on with the same blood, or does he have to go back and do a new one? And that first pod has to be sent out and burned outside. That was the question, and we're going to see today two issues that this question will depend on. The first that we already started talking about, which is a definition of pod. Because the pasuk says, "Bezot yavo Aaron el hakodesh befar ben bakar." So he has to come with a pod. So does that mean his pod? Right? Obviously, he's not bringing a whole bull into the kodesh kodashim, but rather the blood. So pod means the blood, but does it have to be the blood of a pod that he did shechita on, or can pod mean the blood of even if it's someone else that did it? So we're about to see three proofs that blood from Kohen A can in fact be used as the bull for Kohen B, and that the definition of pod can apply just to the blood. Even though he didn't do shechita, it's enough just to have the blood. So let's start with that. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha is questioning Rabbi Ameh, who had the stringent opinion. He said, no, you should be lenient. Why? Regarding a korban hatat, it says that after you do shechita and you sprinkle everything and you put all the parts that need to go on the mizbeach, you take out the remnants of the pod. Yet it's talking about remnants of the pod, the carcass, and yet it calls it pod. So now we see that a part of something can be called a whole, right? A part of the bull can still be called bull. Therefore, just the blood can be called pod. So I don't have to bring the whole pod myself and do shechita. I can just bring the blood, and that's considered bringing the whole pod, and therefore you should be lenient. And the kohen gadol does not have to bring another one. So is that a good proof? Not necessarily. Sheyosi et kulo. Maybe it's just saying see et kol pod is saying that bring everything, all the leftovers. Don't leave anything behind. Anything that you didn't use, you should burn outside. So that we reject the proof. We're going to reject all these proofs. Second one, on Yom Kippur, at the end of that paragraph of Atonement, it says these two, the pod and the sa'id that the kohen gadol brings, you should remove outside and burn the rest outside. So once again, we're only talking about the leftovers of it, and yet it calls it pod and sa'id. So we see that even part of an animal can be called pod. So too, the blood should be is called pod, and so therefore I shouldn't have to bring a new pod. I can use the previous kohen gadols. Is that a good proof? Amar Rav Papa be'or ubasar uferesh tekula amala plike. It says no. That's talking about the actual, the hide, the flesh, the excrement that might have been in the animal, and everyone agrees that that's called pod because that's part of the flesh and blood. Sorry, the flesh rather, right? The flesh and of the pod that's still there. So yeah, that's called pod. Kipligi bedam. The question is dam because that is removed from it, and that's less substantive than like the hide, for example. And so dam ikre pod, dam la ikre pod. So you can't bring a proof from this pasuk, which is talking about it's flesh and hide. That, yeah, everyone agrees, but dam is still up in the air whether you can call just the blood of an animal, can you call that an animal, or does it become kind of a new entity? So still no answer. Third attempt, Amar Rav Hashem, Mistabera Kiman Damar Dam Ikere Par. Tichtiv bezot yavo Aaron el hakodesh befar ben bakar. Let's go back to basics, back to the pasuk, right? The pasuk says, how when Aaron comes into the Kodesh Kodashim, he has to come in with a par ben bakar. Atu bekarne me'ayele. It's a kind of funny line, right? Is he holding it by its horns and pulling an entire bull into the Kodesh Kodashim, right? It's a funny picture. Obviously not. So therefore, obviously he's talking about dam, and yet it calls it a par. So par is so just the blood is called par ben bakar that he's bringing in, and therefore, as long as the next second kohen gadol is bringing in the blood, that's sufficient. He doesn't have to go back and slaughter another par. So Ella bedamo v'kareh lepad is bring the blood, and the blood is called a pad. So this seems to be a good proof. However, there's another way to read the pasuk. V'idach, the one who says that the opinion that says yes, you have to go and make a new one. The second Kohen Gadol has to make a new one after the first one dies. Says, "Bameh huchshad Aharon lavod hakodesh befal ben bakar lechatat." Can read the pasuk as follows, right? Bezot yavod Aharon el hakodesh doesn't mean literally that he comes into the kodesh with a pod. It means that it's a prerequisite. In order for Aharon to be ready to enter the kodesh kodashim, he has to outside bring a pod ben bakar lechatat. When he sacrifices that, slaughters it, right, and prepares that blood, after he does that, then he can come into the Kodesh Kodashim, right? I mean, he is going to eventually come into Kodesh Kodashim with the blood. But actually, the first time he comes in is with the Ketoret. So actually, this is quite a very nice peshat reading of it. It's not literally that it's walking in with the bull, but simply a prerequisite. And so we have three attempted proofs, and we leave them all there ambiguous. Question?
Yeah, I'm a little confused because the question isn't whether the par is a physical, the whole par, or the blood. I thought the issue was that it's not the par for his hatat. So the guy slaughtered the par for his hatat, and he died. So it's no longer his hatat. So it's not a question of is it the blood or the whole animal? Mm-hmm. It's the idea that it's not his hatat that he's going in with.
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the question of the vidui is something I brought in. The Gemara doesn't actually address that. I just thought that was something relevant because he's doing vidui on it. But the Gemara is focusing just on the word pod, that he has to bring in a pod, and the definition of pod is, look, in either way, he's not bringing an actual bull in, he's bringing the blood. But so the blood represents the pod. Does it represent the pod or not? So if he's the one that slaughtered it and he collected the blood, and so then since he did everything, so then for sure that's okay. But the question is, if he didn't do that first step and there's only blood, so now the blood is disconnected from the original pod because he's not the one that did it. So is it sufficient if I just have the essence of something and I'm not the one who received it from the original animal? Is it still called pod? Somehow if I did everything, so I brought the pod, I'm the one that got the blood, I'm bringing it in, so that's called that I brought the pod in, right?
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, something like that. Okay, good. So now we're going to get to a bit of a complex discussion here. The outline is very simple, though, very straightforward. And so we're dealing with the same question, the same case. If a Kohen Gadol dies, he brought his pod, hatat, and then he dies, can the second Kohen Gadol continue and bring the same animal? So far, we've been talking about it from the definition of pod. Now we're leaving that alone. It says, okay, even if you can resolve that issue, we have another issue, which is a hatat in general. If there's an individual hatat and that person dies, then the hatat has to be left to die, right? If a person, they violated Shabbat by mistake. Okay, so they go and they get an animal, all right, says, this is going to be my hatat. The person dies. No one else can use that animal. You can't get someone else. Oh, I also turned on the light by mistake on Shabbat. I'll use his animal. No, that one goes out to die. So therefore, this is a korban hatat, the part of the Kohen Gadol. And so the question will hinge on, is it an individual or a communal hatat? If the part of the Kohen Gadol is an individual one, he does in fact bring it from his own money, right? And he does make vidui on himself. So you might consider it an individual, and then maybe just, has in mind everybody else, all the other kohanim. If it's an individual chatat, then for sure, if he dies, the next person has to bring a new one. However, if it's considered a communal chatat, then a communal chatat we're all bringing, right? If one of the people who happen to be actually physically bringing it dies, it doesn't matter. It's brought on behalf of an entire group, then it doesn't go out to die, and you can continue using it. So this question is going to hinge on, is the pod of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur individual or communal? So this is really an interesting question also conceptually, right? What's the Kohen Gadol's role? Is it, really for himself, or is he acting as part of the community? How do you consider Kohanim? You think about leadership Is it really about him, or is he just part of that whole of all the kohanim? Okay, so I think there's a lot of conceptual matters, but we're basically going to see three proofs. The first one will be rejected, that says it's communal, but 2 and 3 will be accepted. And we will conclude that there are at least some opinions that say it's a communal hatat, and in that case, the second Kohen Gadol can continue to use it, although there is at least one opinion of Rabbi Meir that says it's korban yachid. According to that, the second one couldn't do it. Okay, so now that we have the big picture, let's see the sources. We can answer the question, the original question of the case of the Kohen Gadol that dies, that is a hatat whose owners died, or owner, right? Or in many cases, the owners died. And if any case that the owner dies, a korban yachid, then the animal has to be sent out to die. No one else can use it, and this should be the same. Amar le Rabin bar Rav Ada le Rava. So he tells Rava. Now there's no name to the this original thesis, but since he's responding to Rava, so we can assign Rava as the person saying this thesis. So Rava seems to be the one that's saying that yes, it's a korban yachid. But Ravin says, Amri Talmidayich, your own students said the opposite, gave an answer to this. Amar Rav Amram, hatat siburhi velo lemita azla. This, the part of the Kohen Gadol is a communal offering, and therefore, no, it doesn't have to go out to die. The second Kohen Gadol can go and use it. What's our proof that it's a communal offering? Well, we're going to try to bring a proof from this following Mishnah / Tosefta. It says Titanan, but it's not exactly the same as the Mishnah. So we'll call it baraita. Titanan. Amar lo Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was responding to Tanakama. It doesn't quote Tanakama here. We're about to quote Tanakama over here. So I'll read it a little bit out of order so we have the context. The first opinion said, Korban simur dochet Shabbat v'tatuma. Korban yachid eno dochet lo Shabbat v'lo tatuma. Here's a general rule: a communal offering it can be brought on Shabbat and even when it's tameh, because the communal offering is very important. However, a individual offering does not override Shabbat and Tumah. If it's Shabbat, you can't bring your individual offering. You got to wait till the next day. If it's tameh, you can't bring it. Sorry. That's his general thesis of the Tanakama. Now, Rabbi Meir comes to question it. Amar lo Rabbi Meir, v'halo par Yom Kippurim, v'habite Kohen Gadol, u'Pesach de korban yachid hu, v'dochet haShabbat v'tatuma. Says, I don't agree with your rule. Look at this, right? You have the pod of Yom Kippur. That's one we're talking about. Also, the Kohen Gadol, he brings his meal offering every day, and Korban Pesach. These are all individual offerings, and they are done on Shabbat, and they all are done if they are tameh. So, okay, that's his rejection of the first opinion. Now, here's why we're bringing it. So since Rabbi Meir is saying, oh, I think that these are korban yachid, it means that there must be someone else who thinks that they are korban tzibur. So that's his roundabout proof that, yes, I think that there is someone that says they are korban tzibur. That's what Ravin is telling Rava. But this is not really a good reading, because the third clause in the Mishnah says, in the Tosefta says, "U'tamaich dekatani amar lo Rabbi Yaakov behalo par ha'elim davar shel sibur u'seirei avodah zara v'chagiga de korban sibur ve'en dochin lo Shabbat v'lo Tumah." So the next clause brings this proof, examples that are exceptional to the rule from the other side, right? Because these three items, if a community makes a mistake and sins, so they all bring this korban, or if a Sanhedrin makes a mistaken ruling about avodah zarah, they bring the special korban, korban chagiga. These are all korban sibur, and yet you do not bring them on Shabbat, and you do not bring them if they are tameh. So you see, that's not they're arguing with Tanakama. Now, since the Rabbi Yaakov is saying, if you're going to read Rabbi Yaakov the same way you read Rabbi Meir, then you would infer that, only Rabbi Yaakov thinks that these are korban sibur, and there's someone else, miklati kalaman damar yachid, that someone thinks that they are individual, but no one thinks that. Okay, there's no one that thinks that these three here are in fact a korban yachid. So when Rabbi Yaakov is saying this, he's not saying it to argue on the category, but rather to bring exceptions to the rule. So too, Rabbi Meir here is not saying, I think they're korban yachid, but someone else thinks they're korban sibur. That's not the implication. He's bringing it as he thinks everyone agrees to it, and it's just an exception to the rule. So therefore, we're going to read it according to the Peshat. So in case you didn't follow all that, now we're going to represent the whole Mishnah with the regular reading. I think with the Peshat reading. Ella, the Tanakama Kamehadele. Rather, these two sages, Binyamin and Yaakov, are simply responding to Tanakama. They're not arguing on a categorization. And here's how it works. The Shma'eh de Kamar, Korban Sibor doche et Shabbat et Atuma. Korban Yachid no doche lo et Shabbat lo et Atuma. They heard the Tanakama give a rule. How do you know if something can be brought on Shabbat or not be brought on Shabbat? It depends. If it's a Korban Sibor, it overrides Shabbat and Tuma. If it's a Korban Yachid, it does not. And to that, they both said there are exceptions to that rule. Amar lo Rabbi Meir, Korban Yachid kelalahu. Is that really a rule that all Korban Yachid doesn't override Shabbat? V'lo par Yom Kippurim v'chabit kohen gadol uPesach. The Korban Yachid hu v'dochin Shabbat ve'et Tum'ah. Here you have three things that are Korban Yachid, and yet they override Shabbat. So your rule is not a good rule. He wasn't saying that someone else disagrees about the category, right? He's just saying that your rule is bad. Amar lo Rabbi Yaakov, Korban Sibur kelalahu. Rabbi Yaakov says, I don't agree with the other part of your rule, that anything that's a communal offering overrides. V'halo paradem davar shesibur. Se'avodah zarah chagiga. Korban Sibur hu ve'en dochin lo Shabbat ve'lo et hatuma. So since they found so many exceptions, we have a rule. You can have one or two exceptions. We have so many exceptions, then the rule is not a rule anymore. Rather, they offer a new rule. Ela nekotai kilala bidach. כל שזמנו קבוע דוחה את השבת ואת הטומאה, ואפילו ביחיד, וכל שאין זמנו קבוע אינו דוחה לא את השבת ולא את הטומאה, ואפילו בסיבור. The rule to decide if something overrides or not is if a set time has to be brought this day, like anything has to do with a holiday, right? Has to be brought that day. So then it overrides Shabbat. And it doesn't matter, even if it's an individual sacrifice. Whereas anything that does not have a set time, and you can bring it tomorrow. It doesn't matter when you bring it, then it does not violate Shabbat, even if it's a Korban Sibur. So this makes a lot more sense. And this rule accounts for all of the exceptions. Okay, this is a very interesting source just in and of itself. The point for us is that we were trying to read the statement of Rabbi Meir saying, I think this is a Korban Yachid. So we're trying to infer someone else thinks it's a Korban Sibur, but really there's not sufficient evidence to make such an inference from his words. He might just be responding to the rule that Tanakama said. Okay, so that's the first attempt that is inconclusive. But here's the second one. It's a baraita regarding lost animals. And once again, what we're looking for is a proof that the pod of the Kohen Gadol is a communal offering. And if it is in fact, okay, what we just saw, by the way, is that at least the Meir thinks it's a Korban Yachid. Okay, so we have the answer would be no, according to the Meir, but we don't yet know if there are others who say that yes, it is a Korban Sibur. So that's what we're still looking for. Okay, so we're going to try to look for a proof that is Korban Sibur, and if so, the second Kohen Gadol can use the first one's pod and continue without having to make a new one. So here we go. Itibe Abaye. Right? Abaye is giving a questioning Rava. Rava who said it's Korban Yachid. He's going to say, no, I think it's a Korban Sibur. Par v'sayish Yom Kippurim she'abdu v'frish acherim tachtehem. The case is that the bull and the goat of the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur that were lost. And then, so they said, where are the animals? We don't know where they went. And so they bring others as a substitute for them. And then you find the originals afterwards. Kulam yamutu, so they have to go out to die. Also, these for avodah zarah, that if the community does avodah zarah, so then it's the same law. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon omerim. ידעו עד שיסתעבו וימחרו יפול דמיהן לנדבה שאין חטאת ציבור מתה. So they argue with the law and say, no, don't send them out to die, but rather, don't kill them, but rather they should go and graze until they become unfit. They get a blemish, and then you sell them. And with the proceeds, you can bring extra offerings that will go on the mizbeach. Why do they say that? Because korban sibur should not be killed. That's the key line. We're talking about the pod of Yom Kippur, and it says it's a korban sibur. So here we go. We have at least a couple of opinions here that say the pod is a korban sibur, and since the korban sibur, even if the original kohen died, the second kohen gadol can continue. It doesn't have to bring a new one. All right, that's a nice proof. Let's see. Amar le, my pod ha'alem davar shel sibur. Look carefully at the words. It said pod v'seir shel kippurim. You could put a comma after this pod, right, and say pod, and that's talking about a pod of a community, because if they sin, they forgot a law. The Sanhedrin said a wrong law, and so they bring a pod, comma, and also Seir Yom Kippur. So that, according to that, the pod of Yom Kippur is not mentioned in this baraita. So then maybe we can prove it. So hold on. Yom Kippur katani. It doesn't say pod Yom Kippurim. Katani, ki katani ad the maybe Yom Kippurim is only going on Sa'id, right? So put the comma here, and then you wouldn't have a proof for it. So this may not be a proof. Question?
Yeah, in the earlier proof that was brought, isn't the fact that Rabbi Meir says that it's a thing of yachid? Mm-hmm. Why aren't we considering that?
Yes,
when he's considering it a yachid.
Yes, it is. So the Rabbi Meir says it's a korban yachid. So according to the Rabbi Meir, yes, once the kohen gadol dies, the animal would have to go out and be burnt outside, and the second kohen gadol would have to bring a new one. That's definitely true for the Rabbi Meir. However, does everyone agree to that? Right. So what we're looking for is someone who says it's a korban sivur, and therefore the question will still be kept alive. Right. The question was, does he have to do this? Can he bring it or not? So we don't have a solution. And Rava was saying, I have a solution. It's a korban yachid, right? Doesn't everybody agree to that? And we said, well, Rabbi Meir agrees to that, but not everybody, right? And so if we can find someone or a few people that say it's korban sibur, then we can reject his Rava's hypothesis, right? Because not everybody agrees to that. Okay, good. So now we're not giving up on this baraita because we have another version of it. It has a couple of extra words. V'hatanya pad shel Yom HaKippurim. Okay, thank you. So you can't put the comma there anymore because this says specifically the pad of Yom Kippurim. And this Sa'ir shel Yom Kippurim she'avdu. It's interesting that there are both of these baraitot exist, right? It sounds like someone recognized that there's an ambiguity and brought up the question, and so then was able to clarify it. So and they got lost, and then they brought a replacement, and then the replacements were found. According to the Biyuda, they are all sent to die. However, the Elazar no, even though you brought a replacement, so you don't need the original ones anymore. So what do you do with them? You let them graze. When they get a blemish, you sell them and buy other animals for nedava, and because they are korban sibur, and you don't kill a korban sibur. So there you go. We have two opinions that say pod of Yom Kippur is in fact korban sibur. Now Rava will try to answer this. La tema she'en hatat sibur meta ela ema she'en hatat shutafin meta. Now Rava says he just clarifies. He's not actually disagreeing. He says, I agree, right? This is in the category of korban sibur. He's just making a slight distinction. Don't call it korban sibur, but rather hatat shutafin. Hatat shutafin is maybe a group gets together and shares a hatat, a shared hatat. What's the difference? The difference is, my nafkamina, delamai tu kohanim par behora'ah. If a Sanhedrin or a whole group makes a mistake, and that could apply to a shevet, a whole tribe, then they bring a korban hatat of a sibur. So that can apply to a shevet. It does not apply to all the kohanim. So he just wants to say, don't call all the kohanim a sibur. The kohanim can be shutafin. So it's just a fine distinction that has to do with another issue of a sin offering for making a communal mistake. But it doesn't make a difference for our purposes. For our purposes, the point is that this is not a korban yachid. The pod of Yom Kippur the kohen gadol is not korban yachid, and therefore, if he dies, you don't have to kill the pod. The second kohen can continue and use it because it's a pod of shutafin, which has, for this purpose, the same law as for sibur. So even Rava is kind of coming along and saying, okay, technically, I just disagree with this designation, but you're right. Okay, good. So we do have a good proof that there are some opinions that say it's a communal offering, and therefore the second kohen gadol can use the one of the first one who died. And then we're going to have one more proof that this is true. It's a short proof, but then we're going to go into that source and discuss it at more length. So Tashima deba'e Rabbi Elazar l'divrei ha'omer par Yom Kippurim korban yachid oseh temura o eno oseh temura. So he had a question. Elazar had a question, and they said, according to the opinion that says that the part of Yom Kippur is a korban yachid, so that's already the proof, right? Because he says, according to that opinion, that means there is another opinion, right? So that we can infer that someone says sibur. Anyway, his question is, even if you say it's a korban yachid, can you make a temura or not? Temura means if I want to make a substitute, right? I designated animal A, and then I look at it and say, oh, I feel bad. I like this. I like this animal. I don't want to use it. I want to switch it for animal B. And the law, as you know, is that it doesn't work, right? And the first animal is kodesh, and the second animal is kodesh. That is true for korban yachid. That law of temura is so I can temura is effectuated regarding in a korban yachid. In general, in the korban sibur, it does not happen. If I take the animal A and try to switch it to animal B, then the animal B is not a temura. I'm not allowed to do it anyway, but it's not a temura. So that's a key distinction that we're going to need. So his question is, even if you say it's a korban yachid, how about for the law of temura? Right? Is it totally like a korban yachid and you could make a temura, or is there something different about it than you can't make a temura? That's his question. We're going to analyze the question in a minute, but our point now is that we can infer that someone says it's a korban sibur, right? No, don't say sibur, call it shutafin. Okay, fine. But same thing, right? The point is that someone says it's not a korban yachid. And if it's not a korban yachid, then you don't have to kill it when the first kohen gadol dies. The second one can, in fact, use it. So there are some opinions. True, it'd be not to be meir, but there are several other opinions that do say so. Okay, good. So that's the last proof for that discussion, and so we are rejecting the hypothesis that Ava originally brought, that it's an individual hatat and therefore for sure has to be left to die, and the second kohen gadol has to bring a new one. No, it will depend on that machloket. Okay, now that you mentioned this question of Rabbi Elazar, this is a really interesting question, right? Can a bull of Yom Kippur create a substitute like an individual korban? Or for this purpose, is it like a korban sibur? And if you try to make a temura, the second one does not get consecrated on the same level. So that's our question. So let's go into it. Gufa. Ba'ay Rabbi Elazar, divrei ha'omer, par Yom Kippurim korban yachid, oseh temura o no oseh temura, mai kami ba'yale. So what's the essence of his question? What are we really trying to get to? Ibatar magdish azlinan, ibatar mitkaped azlinan. The question is, do we follow the one who's offering the korban or the one for whom atonement is being sought? Usually it's the same, right? If I, turn on a light, make a fire by mistake, or whatever, I slaughter an animal by mistake on Shabbat, whatever, I draw something, so I have to bring it. So I'm the one that bring the hatat, and I'm the one that's seeking atonement. But in this case, there is two different parties, because you have the kohen gadol, he's bringing the korban hatat, but he's trying to achieve atonement for all the kohanim. And so it is a korban yachid for sure, in the sense that it's the kohen gadol bringing it. That's the assumption, right, of the question, according to the one who says it's korban yachid. However, is that what's the key for temura? You look at the one who's bringing it, and in that case it's yachid, or do you look at who is trying to achieve atonement, and that's a whole group, all the kohanim? And in that case, you would not be able to use it for make a temura for it. Temura would not be effectuated, because it's like it's like a sibur for that purpose. That's the essence of the question. All right, is that really the essence of the question? Peshita de batamit kaper azlinan. Hold on, I can tell you right off the bat that we follow the mit kaper, those who are being atoned, which are a lot of people, and then so you couldn't do timura. And how do I know that? Amar Rabbi Abu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, makdish mosif chomesh. He says, in a general case, let's say you made a mistake on Shabbat and you have to bring a korban hatat, and I offer to bring an animal on your behalf, right? I take one of my animals from my farm and I say, this will be a hatat for the sin that you did. It's a very nice thing of me to do. So in that case, if someone tries to substitute it or redeem it, so the makdish, if I try to redeem it, in general, if I try to redeem it, I have to add a fifth. So that's me because I'm the one bringing it. And mitkaped oseh batimura. If you want to bring if you want to make a substitution, then it's the mitkaped that makes the substitution. And so what you see here is that the substitution, the timura law, follows the one who is achieving atonement. And if that entity is a group, then they wouldn't be able to do it. And so that would actually answer your question that in this case, even though it's a part of Yachid, but the atonement is going on a whole group. And so Timurah would not be effectuated according to this source. Now that we mentioned this source of Rabbi Yochanan, he says one more thing. Similarly, let's say you have a lot of produce and you didn't bring terumah yet. And I say, you know what, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to take terumah from my grain on behalf of your grain. So that works. I can do that. And when I do that, I get to decide which kohen gets it. That's called Tobattana, right? Even though I can't sell it to the kohen, I have to just give it to him. But I can decide which kohen I could give it to my favorite kohen. So even though it's terumah for your grain, but I took it from my grain. So it's another similar kind of case where one person is making something holy for someone else. Okay, good. So therefore, the essence of the question is not precisely as you said before. Yeah, in fact, for the law of Timurah, we're going to look at who gets atoned for it, right? And so in this case, that would be a whole group of people. This is very interesting conceptually. The Kohen Gadol brings this pod. His brothers, the other Kohanim, how do they get kapara? Is it b'kibiuta, by the essence? In other words, they all share this pod, and so it's in that sense like a communal one. Or maybe b'kufya means roundabout or incidentally. And according to that, the Kohen Gadol is bringing it only for himself, but he's having in mind that through him, his brothers will also, the other Kohanim will also receive atonement. So the difference here is that if you follow the second one, that Kohen Gadol is bringing it for his own sins only for his own sins, and the other ones just piggyback on him, or all the other Kohanim piggyback on him. In that case, it's totally an individual, right? He brings it for himself. He's the only one that is directly getting atonement for it. Therefore, if he wants to bring a substitution, if he tries to bring a substitution, it will effectuate, and it will be a timurah. The second animal will also be consecrated. However, if you think of the first one, that the Kohen Gadol is offering it, but he's doing it on behalf of everyone, and really this pod is directly atoning for everyone. In that case, since we always follow the mitkaped, and the mitkaped is a whole group. If then someone tries to make a timurah, it will not effectuate, and the second animal, that the substitution, will not be consecrated. Okay, got it. So that's the question, and we're going to try to answer it from three sources. The first one will say that it cannot substitute like an individual one, and the second one will say yes, it can act as an individual one. So now remember, this whole question is not relevant to our original question of the Kohen Gadol dies. This is just one within this regarding the laws of Timurah. Okay, so here we go. Tashema. Okay, that's what I brought the no and yes is what I just said, right? The two different sides of it. And it's actually, we're just going to bring one source to prove it. And this is a baraita regarding the relative stringencies of these two categories. Tashema. Chomer bezevach mi batiruma, vechomer batiruma mi bazevach. Okay, so if I take animal A and I say this is consecrated, it's going to be my hatat. And then I say, you know what, I changed my mind. I want to consecrate instead animal B. What happened? I want to change it. So what happens is animal A and animal B are both consecrated. And theoretically, they're equally consecrated. I create a clone of the first one. However, if you look at the details, this baraita is saying there actually are some differences between the initial korban A and the Temura korban B. In some ways, the zevach, the initial one, is more machmir, and in some ways, the Temura has aspects that are more machmir. So what are they? Regarding an individual, the initial offering, an initial offering can be brought as a yachid or basibur, which is not true for temura. A temura only becomes consecrated if I do a temura of a korban yachid, so not a korban sibur. Vedochet hashabat, an initial offering, if it's something that has to be brought on Shabbat, is brought on Shabbat, whereas a temura is never brought on Shabbat because temura can always wait. And the same thing with if it becomes tameh. Ve'oseh temura ma she'en ken ba temura, and making another temura. So if I have animal A and I try to make a substitute, and then I have B, if I try to substitute B, it doesn't make a third substitute consecrated also. It only goes one level. So these are stringencies regarding the original korban over the temura. And the opposite, that temura, animal B, let's say animal B has a permanent blemish, and they say, oh, I want to switch animal A to animal B. Animal B becomes consecrated even though it has a permanent blemish. That's a stringency, because in my original consecration, if I try to consecrate a blemished animal, it will not work. It will not get kiddushat haguf, only kiddushat damim. And that timura, that second timura, it cannot become cholin and then be sheared and worked. So there are some cases where my initial one, if it turns out to be that it's not a good korban, so it becomes chulin, and I can eat it like chulin. However, it cannot be shorn and it cannot be worked. That does not apply to that. That's a leniency in the initial one, and timura never has that leniency that it can end up becoming chulin. Ma'ashen ken bazevach, and zevach can do that. Okay, so these are a couple of laws that are this way and that way. Why are we bringing this whole thing? Hai zevach hechidami. The question is up here. What kind of korban can fit into this category, right? That's something that is yachid and is dochesh Shabbat. What kind of korban is yachid and is dochesh Shabbat, right? Right? Does any individual offering, if I just want to bring my own korban hatat, can I do it on Shabbat? Can I do it as tameh? No. Ela de sibur mi oseh temura, and then other hand you said it works in a sibur, and there's some kind of thing that's a sibur, but that can effectuate a temura. What is that? So right, there's what can we find that fits into all these details? Ela lav de par. Oh, here's one. The part of the kohen gadol on Yom Kippur, right? Vedochet Shabbat vet hatumah de kviya lezman. So here we go. The part of the kohen gadol is considered, in fact, a korban yachid, and that's why if he tries to make a substitute, it does work. It makes a substitute, and yet because it's time bound, it has to be brought on this day on Yom Kippur. It does override Shabbat and Tumah. So this is pretty unique, and that's the only thing that I can find that will fit into this category. And so this will now answer our question: can the bowl of kohen gadol create a substitute like an individual animal? The answer is yes, because here's a baraita that says so. Okay, the baraita once again never mentioned that this is talking about a pod. It seems to be talking about lots of general things, but the only thing that can fit into all this description is a pod, because that's the only thing that you can both do a timura and it's tochesh Shabbat, that's yachid, because it's yachid, right? So we have to find the korban yachid that you can do on Shabbat. So here it is. It's a pod, and yes, you can do timura. So that's the proof, the attempted proof. Amarav shashat lo be'elo shel kohen. No, I have another one that can fit into it, and therefore you have no proof. The ayil that the kohen brings, right? Ayechad le'olah. That's an olah offering, and yet that is also korban yachid. You have to do it but you have to do it on this day because it's time bound. Has to be done on Yom Kippur, and maybe it's teaching me that one you do timura. So here I have I have another thing that can fit into the category. So you don't have a proof. And hachi nami mestabera. And in fact, I think this is correct. Isakadetach de paro timura de par. Shabbat v'tumah hu de la dachia ha bechol makrib kareba. If you think it's talking about the pod of Yom Kippur, now what happens with the substitute of the pod? The second half of this baraita says that you wouldn't bring it on Shabbat. That's the stringency. So that means you would bring it on a weekday, but you would never bring it, not even on a weekday. Because it's a korban yachid and it's a hatat. We started with the general rule that a korban yachid of a hatat of a korban yachid goes out to die and is never offered. So therefore, I think I'm right. It has to be talking about an ayil that's an olah that can be offered when it's a timura, when it's not Shabbat, and not a hatat, which would never be offered. Okay, that's Rav Sheshat's statement that no, it can't be talking about the pod. And we respond, no, lo de olam paro. Umay timura, shem timura. I think it is talking about pod. And as to your question regarding this timura, in the second part of this baraita that says the stringencies of timura, it's talking about the general category of all timura. Right? In general, timura things fall into this category. And here, when it says here that this is, it's not, this is dochesh Shabbat, but a timura would not dochesh Shabbat. It's talking about timura in general, and not, which would be true of a olah, and not specifically about the pod. So that the timura is talking about general category, but the zevach is talking about a specific type. It's the pod, right? So that's how he gets out of it. No, if you're going to say that the timura category is talking about the whole category, nothing specific, then zevach also should be talking about the whole category and not anything specific. And we say no. Shem zevach lo ketani. It doesn't say the category of zevach. It says this a zevach. Why? How do you know that? Mimai mitiketani chomer batiruma shetiruma chala al ba'almum kavua ve'ena yosa lecholin ligazez ve'le'abed. I can prove that zevach is talking about a specific zevach, type of zevach, which is pod, and not the whole category of zevach, because it mentioned one of the things that are in which timura is more stringent is that it never can become cholin and go out and you can slaughter it, but you just can't take its wool and work it. However, if it's talking about the entire category of zevach, there is in fact something which is bechor and maaser. A bechor animal, it's born, right? Or maaser that's taken, and they turn out to be not usable. So then you can change it for another, and it becomes chulin, and you cannot shear it or work it. So there is in fact within the category of all zevach, there is something to which this stringency does not apply. And therefore, it can't be talking about the general category, but rather a specific one. Therefore, I cannot agree that it's talking about the category of zevach, but a specific zevach, even though the counter, the timura, is talking about a general category of timura. And what's the difference? What you're saying one and the other? Timura, Shem Timura, Ahati. Zebach ika bechor ve'ika maaser. Because as we just said, Timura, all Timura have the same law, whereas Zebach, there is bechor and maaser. They have a different law than all the other ones. And therefore, that's why I think that this baraita is in fact talking about a pod, and is a proof that the pod, if I try to make a substitute of the pods of the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur, it does in fact effectuate, and therefore, according to the one who says it's a korban yachid, And even though it's being atoning for all the kohanim, it doesn't matter. Still, it's treated like a korban yachid, also for the law of Temura. All right, I know that was a bit complex, but hopefully with the chart, right, we can see the general conclusion, and hopefully if you have to review the details, then by all means do so. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen ve'amen.